That's good. I'm good. Thank you for asking. Thank you so much for that awesome introduction, Irene. You know what, y'all, let me set a timer because if not, we don't know how long this is going to last. Okay. Thank you so much for that awesome introduction, Irene. Irene and I had some fun memories at Princeton, pulling all-nighters, working on Spanish papers and the like, and it's fun to be able to transition from that season of life to doing this work on the Princeton Prize Committee now. It's also really cool that 10 years ago, I was receiving one. Now, I got to be honest, I was a certificate winner, all right? I didn't get the prize, but I was a certificate winner in 2013 when I graduated high school. And it's so cool 10 years later to be addressing the winners of the award. And people who are alumni at Princeton often talk to us more recent alum and say, you know, if I was applying to Princeton at the same time you were applying to Princeton, I don't know if I would have got in. And I kind of feel that way about the prize. Like if I was applying for the prize, when y'all were applying for the prize, I don't know if I would have got the prize. But that's not a bad thing, right? Because that is speaking to our collective progress, right? Like our prize winner was saying, it's not about I, it's about we. It's about how much can we step forward together. And so it's awesome to see that high school students are doing things that we never dreamed of doing when I was in high school, because it means that they're standing on the shoulders of those that came before them and taking the baton even further. So I'm really excited to address y'all today. And I just want to share a little bit of my story of getting to where I am and some lessons from my journey, though I know that you've clearly learned many of your own. I hope that you can gain some value from what I've learned as well. My talk is entitled Plant Where You Bloom and Bloom Where You're Planted. So just a little bit about the garden that I came from. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and I have really fond memories of living in the inner city of Detroit. On my block, our neighbors were like family. I remember playing with my friends outside, you know, going on a Saturday morning, knocking on your friends' door and asking their parents if they can come outside and play. Everyone on our block knew each other, all the parents, all the kids, and being just nurtured by a really loving family of my own. And at the same time, there were also some limiting factors of my experience growing up in Detroit that I didn't necessarily notice as much at the time, but that became more apparent to me over time. Little things like the fact that my mom would tell me when I would go outside to play, don't go more than 5 houses down. I need you to be where I can see you. So when I was riding my bike, I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I can't go past this point. This is my area, and I'm going to stay in here. And that was for my safety. I also realized in hindsight that, you know, it was an important factor of my life that I was in private school when I was in Detroit, because the public schools were something that you wanted to avoid if you wanted your child to get a quality education in many of the situations. And so my parents put me in private schools. Also, you know, when you would ride around, even though our community was filled with a lot of love, our community didn't always look very cared for. Lots of boarded up buildings, trash in the streets sometimes, things that made you feel like your space was neglected. Now, I didn't notice a lot of these things when I was in Detroit, but really I noticed them by contrast when my family moved out of the city of Detroit and into the suburb of Farmington Hills, Michigan. It's about 20 minutes outside the city, but it's literally like night and day, similar to when you go through different neighborhoods in Chicago, right? Segregation can do that. When I moved to Farmington Hills, it was like a whole different world. Instead of being around neighbors who felt like family and who all looked like me, I was around lots of people who didn't look like me and were essentially strangers. I had to go through the cycles or the processes of trying to first assimilate to a culture that wasn't mine, and then learning how to embody the truth of who I was. And I had to learn how to bloom where I was planted. Over time, I did, right? I did my best in school. I advanced into honors and AP classes. I joined the different clubs. I advanced into leadership. I played sports. I took advantage of the opportunities that were around me that were far more plentiful than what I had when I was in Detroit. The neighborhood was safer. Instead of going 5 houses down, I was allowed to walk 4 blocks to school at age 9 because it was literally Michigan's safest city. I didn't have to go to private school anymore. We were able to go to public school. My parents were able to pocket those thousands of dollars, because what you had to pay thousands of dollars to get in Detroit, you could get for free in the public education system in Farmington Hills. And so on and so forth. The discrepancies, you know, are myriad. Nonetheless, like I said, I was blooming where I was planted. I was taking advantage of what was around me, but I also was looking and seeing opportunities to plant where I was blooming. Farmington Hills and that community was not perfect, and I was noticing inequalities based on race in the community in the school that I was going through. In the advanced and honors classes that I was in, students who looked like me were incredibly underrepresented. And even in the regular classes, Black students and students of color were not performing at as high of a rate as their white counterparts. So I joined a group called Strike, Students That Rise to Increase Knowledge for Everyone. And we worked on providing after-school tutoring to minority students who might have been struggling in different elements of their academics. And we also created a professional development day set of trainings for the teachers to talk to them about what it looks like to provide culturally relevant and culturally competent lessons to a diverse community of students. I also spoke at district meetings with parents about the experience of being a minoritized student in Farmington Hills, and represented my school as a representative at our district-wide diversity conference, where we would bring students from the different district high schools to a convening where there was a keynote speaker and there were breakout sessions about racism, classism, stereotypes, bullying, and the like. And eventually I joined the committee that planned those annual conferences, and then we adapted the annual conference where only some representatives of schools went, and we adapted it to happen at our school so that all students could engage in that programming, and it became something that happened every trimester instead of once a year for a select few students. And it's my understanding that that's had a positive impact on my classmates. And so that experience and other things that I did in high school kind of seeded some of my passions for race relations and equality and inclusion and things of that nature. But it only went up a level when I went to Princeton. Because when I went to Princeton, I think that it's like I was given a pair of glasses to start understanding some of the inequalities that I grew up surrounded by, from Detroit to Farmington Hills and beyond. I went to Princeton thinking that I was going to major in public policy and then go to law school, but instead I took sociology as a prerequisite course. And it was there that I started to learn more about social inequality, class inequality, institutional racism, how class differences are passed down through generations. And it just began to put into perspective some of the inequity that I saw from Detroit to Farmington Hills growing up. And it also started to challenge some of the narratives that I heard that never quite sat right with me when I was growing up. For example, narratives that people are poor just because they're lazy or don't work hard, or that Black people don't advance as far in our education because we don't value education in the same way. Growing up and hearing those types of narratives in the air never really sat right with me, but I didn't really have the tools in my arsenal to combat that. I just knew that doesn't seem right, especially being somebody that was from Detroit and saw how the opportunities were so different in different places. I'm like, this doesn't seem right, but I don't know what to say instead. And in my sociology classes and my African American studies classes and my American studies classes, I started getting some things to say instead. Like, let's talk about redlining and how that's contributed to housing segregation. Let's talk about, the inequitable distribution of funding for schools. Let's talk about the disproportionate impacts of police brutality on Black and brown communities and the like. I just started getting language to understand the inequality around me, and it seeded a desire to challenge those systemic inequities in my future career. But I started with blooming at Princeton, right? I started with taking the classes that interested me, joining the clubs that interested me, from mock trial to the gospel choir to the Black student affinity groups. I was the project manager and eventually the vice president of the Black Student Union at Princeton, and I loved planning social events for Black students. I still love planning social events for people, from movie nights to game nights, karaoke, and the like. But also I planned different dialogue events for us to talk about our experiences as Black students at Princeton. And it was in those conversations that people's experiences with racism started to rise to the surface. Experiences like going out to what's called the street. Princeton alum know it's like the street where there's all these mansions where people party, right? Going out to the street at night and being called racial slurs by drunk white students. Or being racially profiled by public safety officers on campus, asking them for their ID because they perceive them as not belonging. Or being stereotyped by new friends, which I know I definitely experienced. I remember being on a service trip my freshman year, and having, through a series of events, this white guy on our trip, say something along the lines of, oh, if anything goes wrong, Bree will protect us, because she's from Detroit. So, she look at her, she can scrap. Mind y'all, I've never been in a fight in my life, but even if I had, that was bogus. That was wild for him to say. Because you don't know me and you're making that assumption based on my skin without actually having a conversation with me. So all types of things were happening. I had a white guy classmate who told me that he was blacker than me because he listened to the Wu-Tang Clan and I didn't. Anybody here who went to Princeton knows, and anyone who's, navigated any predominantly white space as a person of color knows that you kind of it runs the gamut. And so, experiencing those things, we decided to do something about it. And this is where it goes to not only planting, but uprooting. When you see things that need to change, having the courage to actually try to uproot those things and not just leaving them as they were. So we started a awareness campaign called the I2M Princeton campaign. If you actually Google I2M Princeton, our Tumblr page is still up there. It was done in solidarity with other students across the country, from Oxford to Harvard. There were I2 campaigns happening everywhere. It was based off the Langston Hughes poem, I Too Sing America. And it was basically asserting we belong on our campuses too. And we would hold up photos demonstrating some of the instances of racism that we experienced on campus. And I remember we actually printed out those pictures and put them up around campus, and we were encouraged during an Admitted Students Weekend not to do it. But we were we have to be honest about what you're getting into when you come here. We can't only show people the flowers, we have to show them the weeds too. At the same time, we're also willing to have those conversations to let them know that we're not willing to leave things how they are here. And that is where we were at. We were not just exposing things, but we were actively brainstorming what can Princeton do to better serve minoritized students and students of color. We came up with different ideas, like the fact that African American studies should be a major. At the time, it was only a minor, even though they had the best professors, the best classes. It was the most popular certificate program, but it was only a certificate program. We talked about how there should be more rigorous processes for responding to instances of racism on campus. And you name it, we came up with a whole list. And I would love to say that we immediately marched that list into the president's office. But it was around April or May, finals hit. I can't speak for what happened next. I think we just all got buried in our papers and everything like that. And that document had to sit in my laptop until a more opportune time. But a more opportune time came because I was a freshman in the spring of 2014, and it was in the summer of 2014 that Michael Brown was killed by Ferguson police officers in Missouri. I was here doing a summer internship called the PICS, Internships in Civic Service, in Chicago when it happened, and other students were all across the country. But when Mike Brown was killed and his body was left in the street for 4 hours, a wave of grief passed over, the Black community nationwide, and me and my classmates were no exception. We immediately started reaching out to each other, trying to think about what could we do to respond to this grave injustice that was happening yet again to another member of our community. And when we got back to campus my sophomore fall, we held a vigil in honor of those people who had fallen to police brutality. We invited, various different student groups and representatives. The gospel choir, we sang. Some Jewish students offered prayers. It was a multiracial, multi-religious, just a diverse expression of solidarity with our community. We held a town hall to see what would happen, whether Darren Wilson would be invited for murdering Mike Brown. And we all sat together in Wade Cleo Hall when our first Black president announced to us that he wouldn't be indicted. And by the way, don't use this as an excuse for violence, because we're looking for an excuse to be violent in this country. It was incredibly disappointing, and I can hardly describe the heaviness and the sadness and the rage that filled that room at the time. Our professor, Eddie Glaude, was there with us, and he spoke to us. My friend Malachi was there, and he erupted into spontaneous spoken word, and we just cried and held each other. But at the end of that moment, one of my friends, Anaida, said, "So what are we going to do about it?" And we decided to all go back to our dorms, change into Black, and go to the Frisk Campus Center to make signs and go protest on the street. It was the Monday before Thanksgiving break, which is affectionately known as Drinksgiving by Princeton students, where students go out and get drunk because we don't have anything else to do. Well, not me, everybody else. Go out and get drunk because they don't have anything else to do before we leave for Thanksgiving break. And we shut that down. We protested on Prospect Street. We held a Black Lives Matter protest, and some students mocked us and others joined us, but in either way, our voices were heard, and that was the beginning of a movement on campus. We later organized a campus-wide walkout and die-in at First Campus Center, where approximately 500 students participated. To our understanding, that was one of the largest protests that Princeton has seen in perhaps decades, though I don't want to say that definitively because I don't want to erase any organizing that happened that I don't know about before we did that. But all I know is it was a very quiet, sheltered campus, and that was a wake-up call. We were calling on Princeton to not be so comfortable in the orange bubble that you ignore the suffering and the injustices happening to members of our community across the country. And we also took that as an opportunity to challenge Princeton to not be ignorant to the suffering that was experienced by marginalized students on our very campus. So that's when those demands from the spring that got lost in the wave of finals came back, and we presented our demands to administration, our demands for an African American Studies department, for rigorous responses to racism on campus, for greater support for minority students and the like. And we won those demands. Some task forces, some committees, some op-eds later. An African American Studies department was established at Princeton, and when I came back from my first reunion, I got to watch the first cohort of African American Studies majors graduate. A dean of diversity and inclusion was appointed, who is continuing to make a positive impact on Princeton's campus to this day, LaTanya Buck. There was more funding awarded for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives on campus. We also, the following year, protested Woodrow Wilson's name on our public policy school. And at the time, the university wouldn't budge, but to appease us for the moment, they did name buildings after Toni Morrison and Arthur Ashe, and they took down some of the murals of Woodrow Wilson on campus. And 5 years later, during the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020, they finally removed that racist name from our public policy school. And so no, it doesn't have the cute Woody Woo name anymore, but it's also not honoring and uplifting and memorializing the person who resegregated our federal government. So, I think it's a good trade-off. And so that experience organizing on Princeton's campus really showed me a microcosm of the type of work that I wanted to do in my career. I wanted to build community with people, and out of that space of genuine community, create safe spaces to learn about what people were dealing with. From learning about what people are dealing with, advocate for the changes that need to happen, when the changes that need to happen, be at the table as those changes are being implemented. And I'm so grateful that that's what I've been able to do as a member of the Coalition to End Money Bond and the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice here in Illinois. I'm so grateful that at this stage in my career that I've gotten to be a part of a legislative campaign to end the practice of jailing people before trial just because they can't pay a certain amount of money, a practice that has disproportionately ravaged Black and Brown communities. And I know that as I prepare to apply to law school this fall, this is just the beginning of the change making that I'll have the privilege to be a part of. And I'm so excited to lock arms with other people who are passionate about justice and safety and equity in our communities to see the better future that we all believe in. And to the winners of the Princeton Prize, the certificate, the actual prize, I know that you're in that number, and I'm excited to be in this work with you. And so I just want to share a couple of gems for your journey as you move forward. 1, choose your garden wisely. Look at the options that are before you. I'm sure you all got into great universities. I imagine you already made some of your choices, but choose where you want to go, where you will be able to soak in a lot and grow and learn what you want to learn in order to be equipped for the future that you want to build for yourself. Bloom where you were planted. Make sure that you are growing and pouring into yourself just as you are planting where you bloom, and pouring out your gifts and your talents and your wisdom and your passion into making the space that you're in better. But also assess the soil around you and adjust it as needed. For me, at times, I had to reassess the spaces that I was in doing organizing work. Even I was so proud to be a member of some of the organizing coalitions on campus, but at a time, I burnt out doing that work. And I realized that the organizing space was toxic for me. I didn't find it to be full of enough hope and mutual support among the people that were organizing, and I had to get out of there. And so as much as it would have been nice to be able to say I stayed in that group to the end, I had to choose me. And so that's another thing that I want to say is don't forget to water yourself too. You matter. It's about sacrificing, but it's not about becoming martyrs. And you want to make sure that you are being well while you're doing good. I experienced severe burnout at the end of last year after working on the campaign to end money bond, and I had to take an extended amount of time off work. And I am committed to start putting myself first, even while doing this work that I so deeply care about, and I hope that you will too. And lastly, just know that like flowers, your greatness will bloom in seasons. Flowers go through times to plant, times to harvest, times to rest, times to hibernate, and it's all worthy. It's all contributing to the larger goal. And so don't only see yourself as worthy or contributing to the future that you want when you are massively productive. You're also contributing to the future that you want when you're resting, because when we're talking about being our ancestors' wildest dreams, our ancestors did dream of rest. So just know that you can do it all, but not all at once, but you will do it. And I'm so excited to see the lovely blooms and flowers the lovely gardens that you produce and become. Thank you.